Alright guys, welcome to the channel. I just wanted to do a quick presentation. This is something I wanted to kind of share with you guys. This is PowerPoint that I was working on for church security team. And I kind of want to share it with my guys on the channel and maybe make a video where I can kind of show people kind of what I'm going to do, and maybe you can put some input in on it. And if you think I should add something or take away something from this, let me know, guys. So this has got some interesting info. Some of it may, could be a little controversial about, exactly what details are given or things like that. But let me know if there's something that should be changed. And even though I agree with most of what's on here, I did borrow some of this information, so some of it is possibly going to be changed before we actually, or as we kind of continue to evolve. So I just wanted to share that with you before we get started. So this is the start of the PowerPoint. I talk about why, as a church, would we think it's okay to prepare to guard ourselves, to protect ourselves? Should we use weapons and force? And I give, some scriptures here just to kind of add to the PowerPoint and make sure that people do know. Because a lot of people that are religious or Christian think that we're supposed to turn the cheek every time, and that's not what Jesus meant. But they take that literally, and they think that we're supposed to just absorb all persecution without fighting back, and that's simply not true. By the words of Jesus himself and other places, we know that's not true. But let's go into this. I'm just sharing some scripture here. I'm not going to read all the scripture, but I will show you one step at a time kind of what scriptures that I wanted to kind of guide people to showing that we can use self-defense in the church as well. We go over the 4 weapon safety rules. Always keep a firearm pointed in a safe direction. Treat all guns as though they are loaded. Keep your finger off the trigger until you are ready to shoot. Always be sure of your target and what's beyond it. So that's pretty cool. The guy that I kind of borrowed some of this PowerPoint from didn't even have this in his presentation, and I thought this is the number one thing to start off with is these 4 basic safety rules, because a lot of people, even people that can still carry into churches and are part of the security team, a lot of them do not follow these 4 rules. I found out that more often than not, there's sometimes a higher percentage of people that don't follow these rules that carry, even in church security teams. If you're from the South and you've been around guns all your life, a lot of those people have never even heard the 4 safety rules, and they don't really follow them very well. So it's very important to go over this, and I think it's one of the key things to go over. Um, I'll put this in for kind of good measure because it's something that I like to do. For safety, always imagine your gun has a 2-mile laser coming out of the barrel that will slice whatever it is in its path. This is kind of just a visual, kind of a mental scenario I try to think of when I'm teaching somebody what you want to think of when you're dealing with a gun, when you're handling a gun. If you pretend like there was a laser that would chop people in half coming out of the barrel, you would treat a gun a lot different than what you do. But people always assume that there's no way they're going to fire the gun, so they tend to muzzle people quite often, the people that have not had the proper training. So it's something I just kind of give uh, as a scenario of safety. If you think about the gun that way and you constantly have that in your mind, then it makes it easier to know where you're pointing the gun and to be conscious about that particular thing. All right, guys, so let's go to the next one. Uh, Classroom safety rules. All ammunition needs to be left outside the classroom. This is when I'm teaching. If you're doing a presentation or you're leading up a church safety a security team in a classroom, they're going to be bringing their guns because a lot of times you're going to be shooting after, and you're going to do some kind of drill or classification to make sure that they are where they need to be in order to be on the safety team and carry a firearm. So since they have their guns with them, a lot of people may not think about whether it's loaded or not. So we always want to make sure that in the classroom, all the ammunition is left outside the classroom or not around or on the persons, because we might do actually some dry fire training too in the classroom. So that's something to think about. All guns in the classroom need to be clear and checked by instructors. All guns are to be left in holsters or bags unless instructed otherwise by the instructors. Fundamentals of handgun shooting. Okay, we go over some of this stuff. And some of this I've got from other sources. And so, like I said, some of this will evolve. Don't scrutinize this too much because I do want to develop this further because I think the shooting sports and the shooting education and knowledge has changed over the years and developed into something that it wasn't before. So some of these may be kind of old um, ways of thinking. So I want to make sure that we kind of evolve this as we go forward. Stance is the base for the shooting platform. That is true. Stance assists in recoil control, controlling recoil. It allows you to move and react quickly and draw your weapon with minimum movement. So all those things are true, but I think I added some more things here. The proper training stance consists of shoulder squared to the target. And, this is something that's true for new shooters, but I do want to kind of expound on that as we talk about this. If I actually use this PowerPoint, feet shoulder width apart, weight slightly forward on the balls of the feet, so that's good. Head remains high and still with the chin pointing at the target. I think that's good. A lot of people do slump too much when they are shooting guns and pistols, and I think it's better to keep your posture correct, I think. Ears in front of the shoulders, shoulders in front of the hips. So it's just saying to slightly lean forward and put a little bit of weight ahead of your hips so that you don't get pushed back by the recoil. Be comfortable. Yeah, some people go so extreme that they're uncomfortable when they're shooting, so that's important as well. Okay, we talk about the Weaver stance, shooting shoulders back, isosceles, straight, active or moving. And this is what I added because when it comes to advanced pistol shooting, you should be able to shoot accurately and quickly even while on the move. And I think that's very vital that you get past those Weaver and isosceles types of stances and you kind of move into where you can adapt and control the pistol while you're actually on the move. And that might mean, you're leaning around a corner. That might mean you're walking forward or stepping to the side as you're shooting. So I don't want to always get caught up on, I think people need to advance past those very normal training stances, where you're shooting real accurate shots at 25 yards really slowly and get into the active and moving stances and how you should posture yourself while you're moving actively. And I think that's what IDPA and USPSA and 3-gun are really good for teaching people how to get out of that flat range where you're just standing in one spot or that indoor range stance, that we get used to. So those things are really good for that, and I do want to expound on that. Grip. A proper grip aids in controlling recoil and muzzle flip. That is true. It allows the shooter a second sight picture more rapidly. Also true. If you have a bad grip, it's going to be really hard to line your sights back up quickly. Grip is acquired in the holster prior to the draw and presentation, and that is true. And sometimes you're going to have to readjust because sometimes your grip is going to be off during your drawing, and you got to learn to adapt to that. So that's also something to think about. Okay, we go over some different grips. Thumbs forward, knuckle over, thumbs up. Some things you should do and some things you shouldn't do based off semi-automatic and revolvers. This is just some stuff sourced off the internet. Okay, earn sight alignment. Sight alignment is the relationship between the shooter's eye and the rear sight aperture and the front sight. And yes, so we go into that some. The front sight blade is centered and flush with the rear sight aperture. So this is showing you kind of how to line up your sights based off the target. Just giving you kind of some illustrations, kind of target focus as well, target focus or sight focus. And we'll talk about that some more because that is something that should evolve with time as well. Equal height, equal light. So here it shows you the difference between what you're focusing on between iron sights and red dot sight. With iron sights, you want to focus on that front sight, especially as you're training, as you're learning to shoot accurately. One thing I wanted to expound on as far as that goes is from most of the pro shooters that I've heard recently and talking and listening to their lectures and stuff. They say that especially when you're talking about shooting fast and quick, and when you're shooting targets at what I would call gunfight range, 7 yards or in, that you probably want to learn your weapon enough to where you are still target focused, even if you're using iron sights. So we know red dots make this easy because, that's what you want every time you shoot a red dot is target focus. But, it's always been trained in our heads, and we know that we do shoot slightly more accurately when we shoot with the front sight focus on iron sight guns. So, or metal sights, or iron sights, we shoot a little more accurately with the front sight focus. But when you're shooting at 7 yards or closer, you will find more speed, and it's important to know exactly what your target is. So when you focus on that front sight, you can kind of lose, you just lose focus of what you're actually shooting, and that's a little bit dangerous sometimes. So they talk about that some, and they mention how it's very important that you always know what you're shooting. And when you're not target focused, it just can bring a lot of problems. So although I suggest this way of thinking, the way this picture shows, for beginners, I think as you develop your shooting, if you are dead set on not using a red dot, I think you should learn how to, at least on close targets, not pay so much attention to those iron sights, but learn how to line them up and quickly get them where they need to be and still be target focused at those closer ranges. Now, if you're shooting a softball sized target at 25 yards, then yes, you're going to want to probably focus on that front sight and really take your time. But if you're trying to eliminate a threat at 5 yards, you need to learn how to shoot that iron sight gun with a target focus, just so that you know the target is a threat, you know what he's doing, he or she, whatever the threat is, animal, whatever, you know what that target's doing. You're not paying attention to your gun, which could get you in a lot of trouble. You're paying attention to what the target is doing and knowing that he needs to be taken out, or she, or whatever it is, needs to be taken out. So that's very important. So I just wanted to kind of make that clear. Trigger control. Trigger control is defined as steady pressure exerted on the trigger straight to the rear to release the hammer and fire the weapon, hammer or striker. To fire the weapon, immediately allow the trigger to return so the weapon can be fired again. Trigger manipulation. You should press or pull the trigger, never squeeze or jerk the trigger. That is true. You need to learn your weapon, your particular weapon, and make sure that every motion is smooth and it doesn't have any sudden jerky movements or jarring movements that can move the sights while you're pulling the trigger. You never want to do that, and that's what dry fire is so important. Why dry firing is so important in training. The motion in which the trigger is pulled is a smooth, continuous motion, not a jerk or not a little at a time. Not a jerk and not a little at a time. Okay, so it's saying you don't want to go too slow. You want it to be continuous and quick, but not be, not throwing your finger as fast as you can. So you want to have full control over your finger and what it's doing in the gun while you're pulling, but you don't want it to be too slow or too fast. I mean, you kind of want it to be a quick, smooth motion. The speed at which the trigger is pulled is a smooth, continuous motion. Continuous motion at a single speed, not increasing as you apply pressure. Okay, I want to make sure I was in the right one because the way I had this set up to pull these bullet points up. The speed at which the trigger is pulled is a smooth, continuous motion at a single speed, not increasing as you apply pressure. So it's just saying that you don't want to start off the trigger pull slow and then start speeding up. If anything, you want it to be kind of the opposite, where you kind of go fast at the first, then when you hit the wall, if you understand your weapon, you hit that wall, you can actually slow down and smoothly pull through. But it's better if you have a continuous speed, because that way you control that. You know it's going to be consistent. So, but it doesn't need to be slow speed. It doesn't need to be too fast of a speed. It needs to be right where you can control that speed and control that firearm as you pull through. Each shot should come as a surprise. That is true. If you start, really trying to predict when that shot's going off, and you start trying to pay attention, you're going to tense up as the recoil happens, which will cause the shots to be thrown off. So you don't want to manipulate the gun in a special way when you know the gun is going to go off. That's what causes a lot of people to miss their target or have bad groups, I should say. The trigger finger continually maintains contact with the trigger. So yeah, you want to. This is kind of debatable, but especially somebody new, I think it's important that they constantly have that feel, that tactile feel of the trigger. I think this is going to help them when they first start out. When you learn how to shoot and your particular weapon well enough, you can go a little faster and actually sometimes come off the trigger as you're shooting. But you have to have a lot of training and experience with that specific weapon in order to do that consistently and accurately. So it is important to kind of, when you're training people, to say, keep that tactile feel, because you'll be more consistent. Although it's not true for everybody that you always have to be, you have your finger on the trigger as you're shooting. If you have correct grip, trigger control, and no recoil anticipation, the shot will always land where you had the sights when sighted correctly. That is true. Trigger placement and consequences. All right, so we're not going to read all this, but this is just kind of showing you how to place your finger on the trigger. This can be debated as well. It doesn't really matter where you put your finger on the trigger, as long as you're not manipulating the gun while you're pulling the trigger. But unfortunately, most people, when they don't put their finger in a consistent spot and the right spots, will have consequences like it shows. But if you're good enough, if your grip is good enough and your technique is good enough, you can really have your finger anywhere on the trigger and still shoot accurately. But for beginners, this is a good, consistent way to train them to be consistent, and I think it does hold true for most beginner shooters. So I just wanted to kind of bring that out too and make sure you understand. I'm not saying this is true all the time, but I think for beginners, this is a good way to train them. You can see on the right side of the PowerPoint that it gives you kind of, if you hit on the target these certain places, what are these consequences from, and it kind of tells you what you're doing when you hit on those places on the target. And it is, some of this is up for debate as well, but I think it is good information that can a lot of times show the reasoning for why you're hitting there. So breathing should be natural, not forced. That's very true. You don't want to breathe too fast, and you don't want to slow your breathing down too much either. You want to be getting plenty of oxygen to the brain. This is the only way you'll be able to kind of compute your situational awareness, everything. You want your senses to be heightened. You don't want them to kind of slow down. And so you want to get the proper amount of oxygen, but you also don't want to feed your brain too much oxygen and hyperventilate when you're trying to shoot either. That can cause you to be less accurate also. So kind of be somewhere like, breathe like you would if you were doing a jog. I think that's a good way to say it. So if you were running a 100-yard dash, you don't want to breathe like that, but breathe like, the first 200 yards in a 1 mile marathon, breathe like that, just a calm, smooth, deep breaths and controlled breaths as you're shooting. Don't try to hold your breath. That's very true. You will have lose a lot of muscle control. You'll also get a lot of brain fog if you're trying to hold your breath a lot, so that's not good. If you try to hold your breath more than 8 seconds, muscle tremors may start causing erratic sight alignment. It's true. Follow through. Follow through is the end of the cycle of the fundamentals of shooting. It is the point after you have fired a round that the fundamentals begin all over again. Follow through prevents any unnecessary movement before the round exits the barrel. So this is just saying you don't want to move to the next target. You don't want to be concentrated on what's going next before that bullet has hit its point. So you got to learn kind of, just like when shooting a basketball, you don't want to turn and start running the other direction before the ball even leaves your hand, or even before the ball kind of goes into the net. They teach you in basketball, when you shoot a basketball, you want to kind of wait until that ball goes into the hoop, through the net before you start moving or something like that, because this creates more accuracy for what you're trying to do. It's the same way with guns. You kind of want to make sure that your bullet has hit its target before you go on to move to the next position. Drawing and holstering. Follow the 4 safety rules when drawing and holstering. You saw that the first of the PowerPoint. A big portion of a handgun injuries come from drawing and holstering weapons, especially if it's a P320. I'm just kidding. I could have noted that, but that was, that's for some of you, not for everybody. But yes, a big portion of handgun injuries do come from drawing and holstering weapons, and I see a lot of people point at themselves when they're reholstering their guns, or when they're unholstering their guns, they tend to point at themselves or other people, and that's extremely dangerous. Some holsters will increase dangers of drawing and holstering a weapon, so we do know that. Weapons should be holstered in much the same way it was drawn. That is true. Because people tend to draw their weapon a little bit safer with the muzzle direction than they do holster it. They tend to holster it a little bit more flippedly than when they're drawing, so that's just something to note. I've seen people do it dangerously both ways, drawing and holstering, but I see more people holstering dangerously than I do drawing dangerously. All right, so in some holsters, like Serpa holsters, have a button where your finger, where the where the trigger guard would be, and so I don't recommend holsters that have a button right where the trigger is. If the button is way higher than where the trigger will be, it's not so bad. But the last thing you want to do is somebody be putting pressure on a button on their holster, and as they're pulling up, they're still putting pressure, and then when they come up out of the holster, their finger is tensed up, and it comes up and hits the trigger. So that's something to think about. Make sure the trigger finger is straight and stays straight and out of the trigger guard area when drawing and holstering a gun. So yes, make sure you always know where your finger is. Thoughts, questions, malfunctions. We go over some of this. If you want to pause this as we go through, I'm not going to read all this. You can. Failure to fire, failure to eject, failure to extract, double feeding, incomplete discharge, failure to feed or tip up, slam fire, hammer follow, pistol maintenance. We go over some pistol maintenance here. Triple check to make sure gun is unloaded before performing maintenance. Make sure sighting system dot irons is not loose at least twice a year. So yeah, check your sighting system, whether it's iron sights or a red dot, and make sure that it stayed tight to the gun every time you do maintenance, or at least twice a year. Clean and oil striker fire guns at least every 500 rounds or 6 months, whatever comes first, 200 rounds or 6 months for hammer fired systems. I think hammer fired systems has got more parts around the hammer and stuff. Usually have tighter tolerances as well than the striker fire guns, so I recommend every 200 rounds. Check for loose pins or screws or any cracks or damage on the pistol. Change red dot batteries once a year minimum. Thoughts or questions? Back and fight from malfunctions. Tip, do not baby your gun during training. So when you have a malfunction, make sure that you fix the malfunction with authority, because I see people trying to do that weekly, and it takes forever, and you may not ever get it back in the fight if you don't really manhandle those malfunctions safely. You got to make sure it's safe, but also you don't want to treat it like it's going to break, because if you do treat it like that, you'll never get it back in the fight. Turn gun clockwise, tap the magazine firmly, rack slide strongly, ready for the next shot. Okay, sometimes you might have to take the magazine out as well. I would throw that in. This is a good way to try to get it back in the fight quickly. But if this does not work, you might have to actually take the magazine out and then try that over again. Equipment. Gun belt, holsters, extra mag pouch. These are some things that I recommend for church security. Knives, non-lethal weapons, gun belt recommendations. Okay. I go into some of this. I'm not going to read it all for sake of time, but you can pause it if you want to. Holster recommendations. Extra mag pouch recommendations, optional. Some people don't want to carry an extra mag pouch, that's fine, but I recommend it just in case your mag gets dropped in a gunfight, or somehow or another the magazine malfunctions. I like having one. Knife recommendations. I recommend to always have a knife when you're especially on church security, because you can use it for so many things other than fighting, which it is a good backup fighting tool. Less lethal recommendations: pepper spray, stun gun, expandable baton, taser. All right, we just talk about spiritual warfare. There's more that goes on than just physical warfare. Uh, when you're dealing with situations, a lot of times, especially at churches, there's spiritual aspect to things, and you want to make sure that's always at least considered before you make rash decisions like this, because if you don't consider those things, you can run into a lot of problems as well. De-escalation, one of the most important things about these trainings, and I think we don't talk about the training we had before with an ex-cop that had trained many police forces. He didn't say very much about de-escalation, but this is very important. So if you want to pause it and read over this, this is very good information to help de-escalate the situation. Of course, de-escalation is also biblical. Um, Probably more biblical than retaliation, even though retaliation in certain circumstances is very biblical. Securing your property, your country, defending your life is very biblical, but de-escalation is extremely biblical as well. Any questions or thoughts, please leave those in the comments below. All right, we've ended the slideshow. Let me know, guys, if there's anything that needs to be added or taken away from this. I think this was a good PowerPoint for our security team. If you think that something could be written a little bit different, or you see some way I can make this a little bit better, let me know. I would really appreciate it if you like and subscribe if you watch this. And please leave comments and inputs, like I said, below. Please watch the other videos on my channel if you want to know more, for more training, drills, reviews, gear, EDC, talks, and stuff like that. Just check out the channel, and I appreciate you guys. I'm probably going to do a video pretty soon talking about new shooters, just going over the basics for new shooters. I think that would be a good video to make. So let me know if y'all are interested in that as well. But God bless, have a great day, and I'll catch you guys later.